Good afternoon, everybody, the presence and in remote connection. It's my pleasure uh, to start this afternoon. So we're going to talk in a fire chat with Darren from Northern LifeLock. We were going to discuss about well, not what has been discussed this morning, let me say. We try to be relaxed and very open. It's we discussed before ahead, but we said let's improvise, let be open. And this morning we heard the start with Vice President Skinas he said about the crisis. Actually, it's not a crisis; it's a real war. We have problem these days about migrants. We have problem with the geopolitical situation across the world. We have problem with the energy. The energy cost is sky high. So what we have a lot of problems. Now, let me say, let me be relaxed after lunch and think about the future. So we try to discuss now with Darren. He is CTO in Outdoor LifeLock, so he has a full technology view of the future, let me say. I'm trying, let me say, I play with science fiction sometimes. I like to write something during my summer, but just try to understand what could be the vision for the future about innovation, about technology, and all what goes along with the society, with the economy. And let's say, so to escape from this dramatic moment we are living today and jump in 2035, so a bit more than 10 years, and see what can we expect for that? What new technology that we see today as a challenge, maybe, from different point of view, technology or societal challenges. What could be a situation 2035? This is important because, I'm Secretary General of EXO and discussing with different European institutions and public administration and in Europe. And we try to see also, one discussion, what are the priorities? What are the priorities where we need to invest? And if we don't have a vision of the future, if we don't see where we go, we just invest on bits and pieces because it's the buzzword. So is artificial intelligence a buzzword, only a buzzword? Is, I don't know, quantum computing only a buzzword? Or are we able to build up a scenario or several scenarios where we can really see how the society could evolve, because we never know what the real life will be. And then try to project ourselves in this future and see how we can get there. What are the resources needed? Technology, but also the people. Because the user, we are a citizen, we are a user of this new technology, but also the professionals that are needed. We see already today a huge deficit in expert in cybersecurity. So how can we get there? So this is just the introduction for you. Darren, you want to say something?
I love the introduction, and one of the great things about my job, and maybe for many of you also like this, is to be able to spend time in the future. So I like this idea of starting to think about what would 2035 look like. And it's everything you just said, but it's also the choices we make. Choices we make, hopefully informed by discussions and debates that we have in this room and outside this room, based and grounded in what is technologically viable for us to be able to live in a brighter future. And so one of the things I want to talk about potentially, you mentioned AI, is not just having smarter things, smarter transportation, smarter home are good things, but also how do we have safer things? How do we make sure that the generation of children are not the beta testers of all of this? Beta testing is great. I love having the latest and greatest. I think many of us do. But it comes with consequences. So I feel like everything we've learned, I'd like to be in 2035 and look back and said, wow, we learned from social media. We learned from the early days of applying AI, and we got to a world that was safer. What do I mean by safer? I mean that, for example, your smart car. Today you have a smart car, and the computer vision involved is great. It can look at the road and determine what the signs are, the speed limit are, and some of the obstacles, and keep you on the road. In 2035, I fully expect that to be more prevalent. However, you have to also worry, because I sit in the security world, you have to think about what are the downsides of that. And what we saw was, in great research from folks like Don Sung at University of California, Berkeley, showed that adversarial machine learning was a problem. That you could place strategic pieces of tape on a stop sign, just a few pieces of black electrical tape, and it would make the computer think, the AI, that the stop sign was a 45-mile-an-hour sign, and the car would drive right through it. So I want to make sure that in 2035, we've thought about how we can grab the best and harness the best of these technologies, whether it's AI, quantum, blockchain, but also make sure that we make safety a priority from the outset so that we can avoid all of those pitfalls. We don't want any of the cars driving off the cliff. We don't want them blowing through the signs. And this is more important, and I'll give you kind of an anecdote. So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I live by an elementary school, a primary school. And I thought, well, if we could do that, why don't we just design clothing, maybe a T-shirt or a school uniform that announces and signals to any car that I'm a child, right? Why don't we start thinking about those things in advance? Now, that's an easy example. But what I want to be open to is the possibilities that brings forth, right? I'm sure you might come up with other ones as well. And so, if you think about just AI and security, that's a start. But the second thing I would also say about 2035 is I hope we don't think that we have to make a choice between security and privacy. Too often I hear that to have security, we must give up privacy, or to have privacy, I must accept a deficit in security. And I really don't believe that's true. Just like I don't believe that we have to accept the faults of AI to have all the benefits. I'll give you an example. For security and privacy, and maybe this will be a little bit of AI too, there's this notion in machine learning that the first thing you do is you gather all the information. It's like being in university. You put all the books on the table, you read all the books. Now you've trained the model, gather all the data. But there's other ways of doing machine learning. Another one is called federated machine learning, right? Imagine instead, it's like in business school. You split up and you have 20 different people at 20 different tables. They each read a book. Then they come back to class and they share what they each learned. That's the global intelligence. We can build machine learning models that do the exact same thing. What does this mean? In a federated machine learning model, it allows you to then have localized learning without gathering all the data in one place, thus preserving privacy. So in other words, every device could be just operating by themselves, but appreciating the global perspective by only sharing that. So these are examples of technologies that have been researched for the last 10 years that I think will be hitting their stride in 2035, delivering those kind of benefits. Security, without having to give up privacy. The ability for, let's say, 2 intelligence networks that are not allowed to be connected to share data. Companies, governments, to be able to do threat intelligence without having to give up all of their data. These are things that I think are entirely possible.
Yeah, in Europe, we are looking a lot about privacy, and probably we are very proud of this GDPR regulation. And actually, I remember when I was in San Francisco, the RSA conference that just been approved, and then people, the Americans, let me say, were just discovering. I said, will it come to us somehow? And I think it progressively is coming. But you said technology is already working on that.
GDPR is another great example. So for example, let's say in GDPR, I want to talk about the right to be forgotten. Do you believe in this audience that you have the right to be forgotten from AI? Should AI be able to forget? Do we need to have something be able to forget in order to forgive? I think these are important questions that are philosophical, but also technical. So I think back in around 2019, 2020, it was mathematically proven that we can teach AI to forget. So there's this notion, right? Imagine again ML, and I'm going to use the library example. Imagine you and I went into the library and we read all the works of Shakespeare. Then we tossed all those books in a pile and burned them, right? So that's equivalent to like purging the database. We removed the material from the database. Is all of Shakespeare gone? No, it's in our heads now. if we sat down and we were studious and had enough coffee, like many of you had after break, we might be able to recreate some of the works of Shakespeare, or at least the first couple lines of it. But the point is, there are these techniques that allow machine learning to forget without throwing away the data, without doing that. So imagine a GDPR request to a model that has learned from millions and tens of millions of residents' information. What if we could surgically go into that memory and pluck out some personally identifiable information? So we have shown mathematically that that's possible. It's this technique called influence functions. In other words, each of the data points that the model trained on, you don't have to throw away the model. You could get rid of the data, but if you wanted to forget it, you could actually just remove some of the data points, the influence of those data points, and with mathematical rigor, prove back to, let's say, a regulatory agency or an auditor that that information is gone, but the model is still good, and you didn't have to retrain. You didn't have to go through the database, remove those requests, and then retrain the model. In other words, what I'm saying is, in many cases, we have to be okay with the idea that we can keep the best of technology, but we can focus really our energy on making sure that we can accommodate all that society really expects from it.
Yeah, the problem we have in Europe, let me be a bit provocative here, so also with the Europeans here at the table, that, I mean, I have the feeling, and usually I have this, and I use this analogy also with friends in investment, and we have a friend here from the capital venture, and they say that usually the Europeans see when they want to invest, and it's the same with innovation, they see the glass half empty because they see the risk. In the US, you see the advantages. You see the glass half full. And the same with innovation. You see the great potential of innovation, while in Europe, we better see, oh, that's a risk coming up because of this, because, well, apart from privacy. But everything is a risk. Innovation is inherently a risk.
Yeah, and look, it's like playing chess, right? The first move on the chessboard and every move after that entails risk. But you can't have a game without moving the pieces around, or at least not an interesting game. It would just sit there as a decoration. I think what we're talking about here in terms of the risks entailed in innovation, and as you mentioned, maybe European versus American versus others, innovation benefits when more voices are included, right? So the more that we include the diversity of the players at the table, I think we'll get better solutions and better outcomes. Because innovation really happens and invention happens born from the necessity of the problems encountered, mixed with, I think, a lot of the context that you're bringing to it. So someone based in maybe the Nordics has a different perception of their particular problems in privacy than someone maybe in, let's say, Beijing or in San Francisco. And by being able to bring all the different players to the table, I think we can actually improve and get to those better futures in 2035. I think we can make sure that we don't miss some of the risks. So I think it's actually a good thing to bring that risk mentality into innovation and then solve for it at the same time that we're hoping for all the benefits.
So you use a keyword, inclusion. Inclusion for us, for me also, as it happens also, I'm Secretary General of a foundation which is called Women for Cyber.
Yes.
And for which you have, your company is also given a big donation recently. And we can really move from, let's say, to social media chat to something really operational. It's come up in the coming months. So thank you for that, by the way. So inclusion is also about how we can bring women in cybersecurity, and not because it's only politically correct, but because we need experts, we need more population. We have hundreds of thousands needs of experts which are missing. So how would you see the role of women in 2035, in 2030?
So I think maybe three things involved in that. One, I just want to double down on the point that innovation benefits with diversity. And so the more diverse voices we can bring into the innovation process, the better. So yes, we don't want to exclude potentially half the population of the world from that process. Two, you're bringing up the notion that we have a deficit of workers in cybersecurity, in cyber safety. And again, we wouldn't want to exclude a huge population from that. In fact, we want to bring that in to satisfy the needs that we have there. I think the third thing is that not only will we have better innovation, will we have a better workforce for it, But how do we get there, right? Let's
That's
look back. If we're in 2035 and we sit there and said, wow, we've made amazing progress. And that's something, so I have an 8-year-old daughter I mentioned earlier. How can I tell her in 10 years when she's 18 entering the workforce, this is a viable career path for you? This is one of many options that you may want to pursue. And so my wife and I talk about this pretty often. My wife is a physician. She works in the emergency room. And, and so what we think about is, okay, and my wife had the same issue when she was becoming a medical doctor 20, 30 years before. When her mother was approaching medicine, it was very different. Did her mother see a lot of female physicians in the workforce? That changed with my wife's generation. Hopefully we can accelerate that change even more and throw fuel on that fire. So how do we do so? One of the ways is, I think you need to have role models. You need to be able to see someone who looks a little bit like you, or at least you can relate to as a role model in a position you might want to do. So the more that we can highlight different voices in cybersecurity. So, for example, the head of our European research labs is Dr. Leila Bilge, coming from Eurocom, and she's based in France. I think we take more of that, we should have her on stage next time, and maybe that's the better way. Bring her on stage and have her be an inspiration and tell her story of how we got there, but also show people. The second thing is you certainly have to, it helps to, at least, have some in order to attract some. So I think the more that we can invest in getting, again, more, in this case, more women into cybersecurity, it will not only show role models, but also it'll just show a familiarity to say, okay, I'm not going to have to be the first one here. I can follow in the footsteps and have a collegial atmosphere of others to work with. Help. And then the third thing is, and maybe the final, is we need to make sure the tools aren't a friction to this as well. I can't imagine if I were, and I'm certainly not, 7 feet tall, and all the doors around me were 5 feet tall, how I would feel walking around. I would need to make sure that all the tools aren't these 5-foot doors bumping into my head. But we've done exactly that, even in some of the naming of the technologies that we use. We talk about cyber warfare. We talk about these things in some very aggressive tones. I want to make sure that, and that's a light point, but maybe in terms of AI, we also want to make sure that the biases aren't baked in there. We need to make sure that the tools are being developed by diverse people so that they feel like the tools they're going to be used in the workforce are going to be ones that they want to use. I think those three things together, role models, inclusive innovation, and tools that fit will help us get there in 2035.
Okay, apart from AI, what would you say?
I wish it was that easy, right? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that
Step
was
one,
easy.
step two,
When I
step three.
think AI,
You just walk there. No
you mentioned the
potholes.
car. That's nice because I'm getting old as everybody. But it's at a certain point in my life, a few years, I said I cannot drive anymore because maybe I have a problem to the eyes as it happens, or something else. And I do need this kind of innovation that maybe is criticized why you shouldn't drive. But maybe I need to drive because elderly population needs certain help, and they cannot do anything else. And today I see my father-in-law, other people that they still have problem to use digital computer, whatever, because it's not so easy to use it. So maybe artificial intelligence will help us in 2035 to have an easy access to all this kind of, to improve the quality of life.
Well, to do that, though, so 2 things I hear there. One is I think there's a huge ability for technology to both augment life for all people and to inspire. And I'll come back to that. But to do so, we need to remove some of the barriers that might stand in the way. So this ties to our last point, which is if we bring more people in, and not just technologists, but, and I would even argue, for example, on the opposite side of that spectrum, it would be good if organizations almost had like a chief kid officer, someone who's representing the voice of children. And maybe you also want to have someone who's representing the opposite spectrum. I could imagine being 80 years old, hopefully not too soon, but 80 years old someday, and wanting to embrace the metaverse, which I'm sure not many want to. 60% of people today say they don't even know what the metaverse. Oh, okay, so you're there.
Where's the future?
He's already in the
Where's the
future.
future?
And what does that future look like in that? But
Yeah.
the point is, imagine I'm 80 years old and I want to go scuba diving at the Great Barrier Reef. Maybe the Great Barrier Reef doesn't exist anymore. I certainly hope it does when I'm 80. How can we inspire people? How can we connect them and use technology in that way and make it safer to do so? And make the on-ramps to that technology more accessible. So that's one thing we have to do. The second thing is we have to augment people's ability, right? So let's say you really physically, the problem with the metaverse is there's no real good place to get a cheeseburger. You can't eat in the metaverse. So that you'll need your EV
I
car to
would
get
prefer
around.
spaghetti.
Exactly. But you'll need your ability to physically move around the world. And so as we think about that, I do love the ability to augment humans. I think it's not whether AI replaces humans, it's about how AI can help humans. And we need to
That's
really say it like that.
yeah.
We need to not just worry about the fears and the dark side of technology, but what are the really wonderful things? And if we put ourselves in that mentality, then I think about if, let's say, I have cerebral palsy and I can't move my legs because I'm non-ambulatory, I still want to have mobility. I look at not just vehicles, but then exoskeletons. How can we think about those who most need technology to improve the quality of their lives? And how can we direct our energy and attention towards making those things a reality? And I'll say this. Someone once told this to us, one of our former chairmen of the board. He said, Darren, the quality of human life is often a function of the energy applied to it. So there's two things we want to be concerned. First, we want to be very careful about how we take energy, our mental thoughts, but also the real world energy, often powered by natural gases and fossil fuels. And how do we direct that towards making sure that the benefit is accruing to those who most need it in an equitable fashion? So, for example, how can we make sure that AI isn't just enabling fantastical experiences, but is also enabling better outcomes for healthcare? How can we use, let's say, we keep saying AI, let's look at quantum computers. Why do we want a quantum computer? You've got Shor's algorithm, you've got Grover's algorithm. There's like 3 things you can do with quantum computers right now that we've theorized. One of those things is really important, solving a very difficult mathematical problem with very low expenditure of energy, and it has real-world applications. For example, the hospital diversion problem. If hospital beds are full, like we saw in COVID, how do you quickly and accurately know where to send the next ambulance to? These are problems that have existed throughout time. The traveling salesman problem. There's all these problems that are fundamental to computer science that have real-world applications for healthcare, for finance, for everything, for education. Let's make sure we apply these technologies to benefit everybody all at once. That's the idea.
And I think you said something very important because the use of energy, we are, I mean, people are scared sometimes. We're looking at the amount of energy for
crisis.
data and so on, and now we have the problem of energy. So if we move to the future where a growing amount of data, a growing amount of energy will be used, that could be a real issue.
We better deliver the outcomes for all that effort. So think about, I'm really inspired by my wife's work as a physician in the hospital. And one of the things they have as a principle is this concept of do no harm. But a corollary to do no harm is that the data they collect on patients is supposed to benefit the patient. So if I'm an oncology patient, if I have cancer, and someone is collecting pathologies from me, it behooves me that I should benefit from the research that produces the cure. It shouldn't just be people are giving their data and not receiving the benefit. We need to, as technologists, as policymakers, make sure that we're not only not doing harm, but to our best abilities, all of that data and all that energy we're expending should benefit those that participated in it. And of course, the third point then would be, let's not beta test too much on the children. Let's make sure that if they're going to have all this data collected, that they truly, as the next generation of leaders and citizens, are the ones really benefiting from this.
Yeah, look, I think we should be close to the end, if I remember correctly. I don't see any warning light, but I suppose we're close to the end. But that's just because we could go on for for half an hour more with you. That's one pressing question to me. It's okay, 2035, we talked about quantum, artificial intelligence, technology, and so on. But this is a cybersecurity conference. How do you see cyber threats in 2035? Apart from privacy that you mentioned and so on.
You know, he's mentioning cyber threats in 2035, and it's very appropriate then that you brought out the Oculus headset. I think that was an Oculus headset. Because if you think about the evolution of cyber threats, early days, it was often about the network. After that, it was about the endpoint, the device. But what really hasn't changed is the model. There are attackers, typically today human or human-driven. Then there are victims, and there are tools and techniques that the attackers use against victims, which could be human or otherwise, right? As we go forward, I don't see that model changing in 2035. What does change is it's not about the devices, it's not about the network, it's about the operating system that was really behind that, which is between your ears, right? So this real CPU, even when you put on an Oculus device, is this bag in your head that runs at low voltage. The gray matter there, it's basically a neuromorphic computer. It's a wonderfully fantastic computer, one of the best molecular computers. And that is exactly. So why does this make sense? It sounds like a whole bunch of fancy words. What is phishing today? Is phishing really all about an exploit in an operating system or on a device? No. It's fundamentally about the ability for the attacker to convince the victim to do something other than what they wanted, to fool them. Fooling someone got easier as our lives went digital, because it used to take, maybe I had to build a bank to convince someone to deposit their money there. Online, I can just create a digital facade very easily to replicate this. The gray matter between the ears is the next frontier of cybersecurity. We need to help people understand how not to avoid being tricked, scammed, right? But also how to avoid algorithmic manipulation, how to understand what is true and what is false, what is misinformation versus disinformation. I think all these things become more clear. Now, this is an opportunity. We can create digital allies. We can create things that show to a user, to a person, to us, when they're being manipulated via algorithms. And when it's going to be in their benefit, there's going to be benevolent things that are happening, and then there are going to be others. So how do I make this real? Today, if I were to use a search engine and search on a term, and you were to use a search engine and search on a term on yours, we get different results. That's what I mean by algorithmic manipulation. Now imagine the metaverse. It gets fuel on the fire. That's what's going to be different. So that's where I think we need to focus our energy and attention. We still need to maintain our vigilance on devices and networks, but the real network is going to be then the gray matter, us, the people, that are being connected. That's the real network, the trust network that we'll need to deliver in the future.
So we need to work on people.
We need to work on people. Everything is going to be people-centric. Investing. We need to empower them with education. We need to empower them with tools. And we need to help them understand the fast rate of technological change. Because everything in cyber happens everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure what happens all at once is good.
So we can have a brighter future.
So we can have a brighter future, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Thank you very much.
Luigi.
And thank you for listening to us.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have to wait for the next panel that I have to moderate. So it's coming up. Oui. Okay. It will come up.
Yeah, they will come up.
Me, poof. Oh, as you like. Please sit as you like. Julie. Bonjour. Ça va? So we have 1 minute to go, according to the agenda, the schedule. Okay, so just in time, we can start. So this is the session 3, an intelligent-led approach to cybersecurity, setting up an EU-wide network of AI-enabled security operation centers. And we have we have a lot of time, 1 hour, 20 minutes, something like this, to discuss with our panelists. We have Julia Roof, Deputy Head of Unit at the European Commission, DG Connect, on cybersecurity technology and capacity building. We have Carlos Cordoba, the Head of Area for Cybersecurity Operations Center, National Cryptologic Center in Spain, of course. We have, that he's on the screen, Jorge Blanco, Global Head of Security Solution at BBVA Group, the bank. We have Leif Nixon, security expert for sector communications, and Elias Santos, that we know in Brussels for ages, head of government affairs programs, EMEA at Broadcom today. Okay, so I'm supposed to make the introduction, then for a few minutes, then we will start with this sequence of speakers, 5 minutes, and then we will have questions from the audience, but also from remote connections. And so the point is that the topic is this, and Julie will tell us more about this initiative or project seen from the Commission, the creation of a network of security operation centers. I know that you are going to call it differently, but okay, that was what appeared in the strategy of the Commission recently. And the question is, are we making things right? I will be a bit provocative in this, maybe not now. I will be later provocative, because I'm spending my time in Brussels in the last years, and I follow the discussion of the Commission, the Parliament. Actually, I shouldn't say that, but I was one of when we created EXO, European Cybersecurity Organization, with the Commission. I remember we had a discussion with Vice President Ansip at that time. They said we should create a network of SOC. That was the key, the buzzword at that time. But without knowing what a network of SOCs was really like. And now we are here. Now we are discussing this. But the environment has changed. The understanding has changed. And today, when we are discussing with the size of the chief information security officers, which are members of EXO, which are linked to EXO, we recognize, first of all, they are speaking language with some acronyms very few people understand. So SOX is just SOX CERT, XIT, and you name it, and you can go on for ISACs and so on. You can go very far from that in naming new acronyms. But then the point is that what I see is that the need from the real life, and maybe Jorge will tell us more because he is one of the users. The need from the real life sometimes look different from the need that's seen in Brussels. So I've been provocative. I will be provocative. Don't worry on this. We will have a good discussion later on. So there is the discussion with the Commission and the Member States. There are regulations we discussed this morning, the directive, the regulation which have been discussed also in the area of the NIS, NIS2 and so on. But is this really what you want to develop with this SOC? Is this the best match with respect to what is the need of the market, of the operators, and what is delivered by the suppliers? That for me one is one of the key issue today, because, and I was discussing with the Commission already years ago, one of the big challenge we are going to have now with this new configuration with the competence center, with the Digital Euro program, is that there will be program coming up, money invested in a certain topic like the SOCs, and the big challenge is to match what the Commission is proposing, the money they're putting, and the money that member states will put on the other side, and also the private sector as well. How we can find common interest. This is no more research for being for a certain future unclear. This is real life. This is short-term results in a way. So we have to be extremely concrete, efficient, and effective on the market needs. So this is just to start the discussion. And I will start now. I'll give the floor to Julie. And
Thank you, Luigi, and good afternoon, everybody. So thanks a lot for the very, very relevant questions and good introduction. I'll try to clarify as much as I can, but I have to say that for us also, this reflection is in a way only starting. So we're also really very keen to hear and get some input to better target our actions. So this idea of creating a network of SOCs, it was announced in the cybersecurity strategy, over a year ago. As you know, I mean, the cybersecurity strategy is about much more than this. So it's one action amongst a much broader set of initiatives and topics to be addressed and implemented. But it's one, and an important one. And there, the policy objective is to address an issue which we note, and I think this is a shared realization that the detection of threat today is not optimal. So we have a problem in terms of time it takes to detect those threats to an incident, and also a limited amount of sharing of information in this area. So this is the basis and where we come from with this idea of network of SOCs. Now, I would say let's not stop at this how we called it. It could be called something else. The idea is clearly how do we improve detection and sharing of intelligence amongst the communities. So we took it from there, and we of course try to understand what is behind, what is the state of play. We looked at the national capacities. We saw that some member states are very well equipped, so they have advanced capacities. They share information through the national CSIRT, so the competent authorities mostly. Some of them have structured channels with industrial actors, but that I think we all know it's still very, very limited. So there are some sectors which are a bit more advanced and where they have established it. There are some initiatives that are also quite successful. But again, it's a handful, and we're not yet in a situation where there is a culture of sharing. So what we would like to do is to advance on the creation of this culture of sharing. We have been working with ENISA, who has set up an expert group to map the capacities of SOCs and also try to understand what are the dynamics in the sector, what are the needs, what are the tools that are being used. So there is a lot of work in trying to understand this market and what is happening. We have worked very closely with member states in also trying to understand how they operate, how they gather the information, and what they would like to improve. So it's not something that is done by the Commission. I mean, we are doing this with everybody. Now, concretely, there will be some actions in the Digital Europe program aimed at reinforcing the detection capabilities. So we call it SOCs, but again, we agree and we all know a SOC does many other things. It's a lot of other actions beyond detection, but our focus is on monitoring and detection. And we call it SOCs again, but we know typically this is done by CSIRTs, by SOCs, by others. So let's again not stop at that. The idea is also not to create a competing network to the network of CSIRTs. We have that at European level. They have various functions. This is very well established. The idea is to complement them, to see how we can create additional capabilities. So there in the digital program for the coming period, there will be 110 million dedicated to those objectives with two strands. One which is a national strand, so aimed at reinforcing the national capacities, public and private SOCs. There will be a call and grants, so the usual modalities. And this call will be published at some point after the summer. So we invite you to watch this space, and there will be 80 million. So the large majority of the funding should go towards reinforcing what exists or creating new capabilities. All of this is a precondition towards then building or trying to encourage a more federated approach. So we would like to, try to create cross-border mechanisms for sharing of this information, building on national capabilities. So this is the second strand in the digital program, where we will issue a call for expression of interest for the setup of such cross-border platforms. And I can elaborate more a bit later on this concept, which we have been developing together, working very collaboratively with member states, and we have panelists here also who are part of this reflection, and where we're trying to map the different features and dimensions that we would need to address for those to hopefully be successful and be able to pool the data from the various sources. So what we would like to see, and that's of course maybe a vision that sounds very remote to some people here, but what we would like to see is a model in which the various stakeholders with their own needs see an incentive to share more. And for that, we understand there are many challenges. One of the key challenges is to create a trusted environment. Another one, which is closely linked, is to have the right incentives. But for all of that, we are now trying to work on developing this concept. And again, we'd like very much to hear from you what you think about those ideas. So that's just in a nutshell, and we'll be happy to react to any questions.
Thank you, Julie. I already have a lot of questions about this, but let me give first the floor to see what is happening in Spain, Carlos.
Yes, Carlos.
Carlos, yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Carlos Cordova. I belong to the National Cryptology Center from Spain. Our constituency is the public sector, only the public sector, but the public sector is central administration, local administration, regional administration, public universities, and public entities. So we have a lot of work. Why I'm here? Because my unit, the unit of SOC in National Cryptology Center, traditionally we helped to the public organization to create a SOC. We have collaborated in 6, 7 SOC. But when the cyber strategy appeared, talk about to create it a super SOC, a cyber shield, a network SOC, and so on, we thought that it was the moment to create it a network within Spain with our SOCs. But we did a step forward and we say, okay, we will do a national network SOC in Spain. Currently, we are in a pilot project with, we are working in parallel in two phases. In one phase, we are working with the public entities trying to involve in the information of the SOC, organizing the SOC. Not everybody has to buy all the solution in the market, depending on the entity of this organization. We advise what the SOC they have to do. We are working also with the private companies that provide security, the providers of security to this public SOC. The idea is very easy, but it's really, really complicated because the providers don't want to share information. Why? It's very easy. If I have a lot of information, and I share with you all my information, you will know the same than I know, I will lose my competitivity. So it's very you can learn a lot to the private companies to say that they will share a lot of information, but the reality is in another way. So we are trying to force these companies to share information, because at the end it's information for the public sector, and we have allowed to allow this share information. We are creating a pilot project. In this pilot project, we created a MISP, a platform to share information. Currently, we are sharing information between 6 different providers. So we are created also a web to trying to offer the project to all the public sector. Little by little, but it's not so easy as it's appear. So in addition of this, I will say that we are trying to do some detection tools with artificial intelligence. This is another complicated issue, because it's not the same to do a detection tool in a hospital that in another kind of organization. So the machine has to learn about the traffic that the traffic that they see in detection. So it's really an issue to put one tool that you can industrialize and put in a different places. It's not a reality, because in each different place they have to learn different traffic. So the artificial intelligence is very good, but it's not as easy as we can understand. Finally, about the question that Julie has answered, I would say that if we are here if we are as secure as we are, is because Commission is pushing. The countries are behind the Commission. The Commission is running very fast, but we are trying to go at the same pace that the Commission. And thanks to the Commission, we are more secure than 1 year ago. This network of SOC is not a network to compete with the CESIR network. Is complemented with the CESIR network. We are trying to share the information of the red button. This information is not shareable right now in the CESIR network. CESIR network more or less now share information about one incident when it's finished, but in our national network of SOC in Spain, the information that we are exchanging right now is information about red button, one IP, one domain, something that we in this moment I have something worried about one data. And at this moment, we share information with all the providers. They are within the national network, and they block this information. So it's something that the previous nobody shared this information. So we are creating something new. I completely agree that this is not. We are not competing with the CESIR network. We are evolving another new field to protect more our organizations. And thank you. It's
Okay.
all.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back on your experience, I'm sure. And now we move to Jorge. We stay in
Hello.
Spain. And Jorge Blanco from the BBVA group. I suppose you see attacks every day. So
Yes,
you know it well how what the SOCs need, why SOCs are needed. Maybe sharing information is needed.
yes, correct. First of all, can you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel and trying to answer your question, Luigi. Do we think that is necessary? Yes, for sure. I mean, we have to improve, as Julie said, we have to put focus improving our detection capabilities, not just regarding the private sector, but also with the help of the public sector at a national level and of course, on a European level. So my answer is very simple. We need a network of SOCs or whatever we want to call, as you say initially, Luigi, but a network that allow us to improve our detection capabilities. How could we implement and motivate the information or intelligence sharing? So that's the key question that the Commission has to solve. So, in my opinion, we public and private sector, we are facing the same kind of problems or difficulties trying to convince our providers or even ourselves to share information. We have to change our mindset. This is not a competitive issue. This is a collaborative initiative to improve the detection. So we have to put focus in the change of the culture, as Julie said before. I don't know what is the best way to face the incentivation or the motivation, but at the end, we all are aware that this is an addition of capabilities. So every SOC, and I don't care if it's a national one, a regional one, a private institution, or even a sector one, has their own capabilities that probably in some cases are very common, but I'm pretty sure that everyone has their own capabilities, their own speciality, and specifically their own intelligence. And this is the key question. We have to see the network as an addition of capabilities to get the same goal together. And regarding that, and trying to give some ideas to improve the motivation to share, I think we have to start step by step, but start creating a trusted environment, not just from a personal or institutional point of view, but also talking about a technological one. So we have to rely on trusted networks, trusted platforms. We have to start to talk the same language. It is quite difficult, not just in the European Union, but I'm talking about the technological one. We all we share or all the tries that we had in the past trying to share information with any kind of institution, we face the same problem. We all are talking different languages inside the same cybersecurity environment. So we have to standardize the way we share the information, and we have to improve the trust with. And let me try to explain that with a little bit of governance. I don't mean that this cannot be a not practical initiative, but we have to ensure some kind of level of quality of the data that we are sharing in order to improve this trust in the initiative. So it's a matter of quality and security because also the institutions mainly are not very alike to share because of the privacy of the data that they are sharing. That maybe they are sharing private information about how are they being attacked, and so we have to work on build a trust environment and not just a culture of trust in order to be able to start the information sharing. And that's are my main points at this.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. Now we move to Live Nixon. So from sector communication, you move to the other part,
Yeah.
to the communication point of view.
Yes. Well, yes. So I have had a very interesting month. I work within the unit of Sectra that handles critical infrastructure, and we run a SOC for critical infrastructure. Among other things, we help secure the Swedish power grid. And as you know, since 2015, 2016, everybody has expected that in case of conflict or war, the first thing that happens is a cyber attack on the power grid. And there's a war, and there hasn't been a cyber attack on the power grid yet.
Well, there has been a little bit before in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, 2015, 16. So that's what was we expected now, but it hasn't happened in this conflict. Russia is coming with open threats against Sweden, so it's fairly tense. We are pretty much on the front lines here. You may know that Sweden is a member of the EU, but not of NATO. We don't have an Article 5 to call upon if there's an attack. We have the EU solidarity clauses. So we have to trust to our friends, but to a large degree be self-reliant. So if you offer me an AI-powered early warning system that says that, oh, there's a cyber attack coming, well, sure, give it to me if it works. I'll take any help I can. But all of this, it's not really about the tech. No, as the vice president said, it's we need to break out of the tech silo. And have been firmly in the tech silo for a long time. When I was 13, I got my first computer, Commodore 64. And back then, I knew that, oh, I want to work with computers when I grow up. And I did. I wrote compilers for a living. That's hardcore tech as it gets. But for complicated reasons, I ended up in IT security instead. And after a few years of that, I suddenly realized that I'm not really working with computers anymore. I'm working with people. And that came as a bit of a shock to me, being a tech guy. And all this about security, it's not that much about tech. It's about communications and trust. I will talk about trust as well. And how does trust work? Well, the human psychology works in such a way that trust is a personal thing. You trust individuals. You meet somebody physically. You establish rapport with them, and then you trust them. Hopefully, at least. It's much harder to trust a faceless organization. And this is very important to realize how IT security works. It's much easier to share information with somebody you know than with this faceless organization. It's much easier to reach out to, oh, I know a guy at that company. He should probably know about this. And I can just lift the phone and call them. Trying to send the same information to a generic contact address is the threshold is much higher there. And also the motivation, of course, because if I have a piece of information that I know will help my friend, of course, I'm motivated to share that piece of information, whereas I may or may not be so motivated if it's just some random company out there. So, and all of this takes place in a very complicated security landscape. There are so many SOCs and certs and C-certs and P-certs and, well, you know them all. And then there are so many networks. We have ECMO, we have FIRST, we have TFC cert, we have Trusted Introducer. We have all the various informal networks that sort of try to organize this in different ways. So if we are going to build a new structure on top of this, it needs to be done with a great afterthought to interface as cleanly as possible into this pre-existing landscape, and the outreach work is paramount in this. And if it's something that I have learned in these 20 years of IT security, is the best way to facilitate information sharing and trust is to create opportunities for people to meet and drink beer or their beverage of choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Leif. I would like to intervene immediately, but to listen first to Ilias. Ilias, please.
Leif, I had an Amstrad 6128,
Yeah.
but it was Commodore as well, the one that got me into this in the first place. So
You're younger. I was with punching cards.
I also played with Spectrum ZX specifically, 64, but I think we're showing our age. We'll start talking about floppy disks
You like
in
the
a moment.
British stuff. Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's also refreshing to be at a conference as opposed to a digital thing. When I was thinking what I'm going to talk about and how I will position it, I was thinking that I'm in an actually fairly interesting role or position inside Broadcom. In the government affairs role, both at Symantec and at Broadcom later on, I would find myself doing the information sharing agreements, negotiating the information sharing agreements. In my role at Broadcom, being also the chief privacy officer, I actually have to sign off on them because I need to decide whether personal data gets transferred or not, and what are the compliance requirements around them. So when I'm looking at the whole discussion around information sharing, security operations, what are the first thoughts that come in mind? Number one, first of all, the initiative of the Commission is good. It's a positive thing that we try to invest in building more capacity, in building more capabilities, in enabling more incident detection into Europe. Now, as Julie very rightly pointed out, SOC, Security Operations Center, can mean a lot of things. I remember at one point in a discussion with a government agency, I had drawn 7 different action areas or areas of focus that the Security Operations Center was capable of doing. And I got a reaction, all we wanted for is initial incident detection and notification. It's like, yeah, but this is all the stack that the technology can deliver you. This is all the things that you can possibly do. So it's going to be very important to, for the lack of a better word, agree on the catalog of services, agree on what it is, the initial ambition of this. Because linked from that is going to be the data that we'll collect, the data that it will be shared, and the common objective that it will have. But before I go to that, some additional thoughts on the AI. AI usage happens already in cyber. and will keep happening and will just grow. Why? Because lots of data. Lots of data because there are lots of devices. Certified, uncertified. The gentleman from the BSI was discussing at the panel saying how many more devices are going to be out there. That will just mean more data. Personal, non-personal, co-generated, to use the terminology from the Data Act. The fact of the matter is more information. And to manage that, we will need AI because we cannot eyeball the log files. Now, and this now comes where the whole reliability of the AI comes into play. Quality AI requires quality training. Quality training will necessarily be linked with access to real-life security data. If it's going to be quality, it has to have a touch of reality. Now, access to real-life data becomes very complex because then is the question of what's your perspective? And what do I mean by that when I say what's your perspective? Are you looking at endpoint data, log files, of the terminal equipment of the computer, of the mobile phone that was impacted? Are you looking at network data? Are you looking at server data? Are you looking at cloud? Are you looking at the at the infrastructure level? Are you looking at the network level? Are you looking at the bottom layer, at the endpoint level? Depending upon the perspective that you have, you may find yourself generating different indicators of compromise or generating different information for the same incident just because you're looking at it from 3 different vantage points. So how you bring all that together, how do you help understand and have that holistic picture is going to be very important. And as we said, access to data for the AI or for the operational capability of the SOC is going to be key. So what are the challenges around accessing data? First of all, and equally around sharing data, first of all, what do you want the data for? Can we agree on what do you want the data for? And then what data are you targeting? I negotiated many years ago the information sharing agreement that Symantec had with NATO. It took us a year and a half. It didn't take us a year and a half because the militaries didn't know what they want. It didn't take us a year and a half because they were slow. It didn't take us a year and a half because we did not know what we wanted. It took us a year and a half because we needed to go through the motions and understand exactly what were the objectives of each side, what were its limitations, what we were prepared to do, what we were not prepared to do. So governance was absolutely quintessential. Then the regulatory environment, GDPR, NIS, DORA. Are we talking about voluntary information sharing? Are we talking about disclosure of information as a result of a regulatory notification obligation? Do I have 24, 72 hours, or without undue delay? Right? So these are just, let's say, some of the aspects on the regulatory and on the actual commonality of objectives, which then brings us into incentive, trust, and ultimately having the right community around the table. And having the right community around the table is critical because I can tell you about the successful information sharing schemes, but I can tell you about the failed ones as well. And I can tell you that the failed ones were usually the ones that were having free riders. Usually the ones that would have people around the table saying nothing and expecting of the one person who had decided that would speak today to speak, to say everything, everybody taking notes, no one contributing. And this is also the challenge with the public sector. Sometimes it is only one-directional communication. So how do you make sure that you get the direction on the other side? And then, yes, there is a cost. There is an investment aspect that one needs to factor. Not just the cost that the Commission would cover with their initiative, but also the cost around building the knowledge, the cost around building the infrastructure to collect, and the size, the scale to collect this information, and then understand what they mean. I think that these are the steps for this initiative to be successful. But I'm definitely encouraged by the fact that, if you like, the Commission is picking up the gauntlet and taking up this challenge, because it means that there is understanding that this is something important. Thank you, Luigi.
Thank you, Elias. Okay, I think Julie has been mentioned many times. Maybe it's time to give you the floor to react to what has been said.
Sure, sure. Thank you. It was really fascinating, and thank you very much for the feedbacks and for your perspectives. So we don't deny that this is really extremely complex. And when we started looking into this, we really wanted to understand what could make sense. And that's why we started trying to think about this concept of, those platforms and how they could work and how to attract, to give incentives. It was mentioned several times, to companies, public sector, whoever has data to share, to participate. So there's no easy answer to that, but I think we have to tackle it and to try to find, from the examples of the successful initiatives, what has worked so far and what could scale a little bit. And why scaling matters, I think it's because exactly of what you said, Liv, the challenge, the threat we're facing, I mean, everybody understands that it requires that we boost our situational awareness collectively, and that everyone is able to detect faster, to react faster. And today, when we look at average time needed to detect incident and breaches, it's, hundreds of days on average. When we look at the cost of not detecting, it's huge. So there's a huge economic incentive, and this is really, we hope, a compelling argument to try to act. Now, how do we move from, it's nicer to share around a beer to, a model that makes sense and where everybody gets something back, and therefore, without the beer even, we could try to do something that is, on a broader scale and goes faster and is more sustainable and we could build upon in the future. So this is the challenge. And we heard a lot at the beginning that you cannot force trust. Yeah, sure, we can't replicate trust that two individuals can build. But can we act on the parameters of trust and see what could be done to propose a model? So we have identified several dimensions which were all raised here, and I'm really happy to see that the thinking that you have on the challenges and the possible solutions, it aligns very well with what we have heard and what we have developed with member states so far. Number one, governance. It needs to be clear who can join, who can share, how you can share and how you can receive information. What are the rules of engagement for such framework? We also need to know how, in terms of incentives, those successful examples, I think if I'm not mistaken, they use this model of give and reward. So the more you give and the more high quality data you provide, the better quality data you can get back. And this is, I think, one of the key success factors. On the other hand, this is something that probably works better for the private sector because they will have high quality data, but we also need to think about public sector actors, and they might have other things to bring. So we have to cater for the profiles of those who will, join, hopefully, those frameworks. So governance, incentives, really, really very important. Trust also in the infrastructure. So having an infrastructure that is sufficiently secure, this is not a given. Today we realize that this is missing a bit everywhere. So we would really need to think about having very good connectivity, very clear rules also on exchange of data. And then all sorts of other, additional features that can help: data anonymization, taxonomies, interoperable or simply agreement on what kind of data to share in which format is super important, and a clear vision of maybe we should go gradually. Maybe there's no need to shoot for something overambitious immediately, like we will probably not be able to share the most sensitive data immediately in such kind of framework. But what about other data? There is a lot, I think, out there that could benefit from being brought together and simply filtered, analyzed in a way that, as somebody said, no human can do. So if we can build some machines that can be used for that, it could be also of benefit to everyone. So these are the kind of things that we are reflecting on, and we hope that this will be met with interest from member states and the private sector, because we will have this call for expression of interest, and we want to remain flexible. So the model has to be brought by the stakeholders, and then we will examine and we'll try to also see how to perhaps discuss amongst those who propose models and exchange best practices, good ideas, refine as we go. So this is something that is not fixed today, and that's why we really want to have a continuous dialogue.
Thank you. So I take maybe 2 minutes, the privilege of a moderator, to say something. As EXO, we have been the partner of the European Commission in building up a public-private partnership on cybersecurity since 2016. And for years, we have tried to build up, let's say, a cooperation among the user to share information, to share data, to share IOCs. And it has been very difficult, extremely difficult, because of trust. Because we tried to not to impose, but to give schemes that were too tough, too difficult, and at the end, we realized that a beer is maybe the simplest way. I mean, decrease your barrier and start with something very simple. You have to create the network. You have to create trust one another. And we have seen it in different countries, European countries. There are a kind of, you can call it club, whatever, of CISO. Mm-hmm. And they are sharing information. I'm following. I had the luck, let me say, in the last few months, to be in a chat on WhatsApp. So horrible, you would say WhatsApp. In a chat of CISO, Italian CISO, sharing what? Sometimes jokes, very often jokes, and sometimes it happens something quite serious. Not too serious, because then they go bilateral, then they go with each other. But the fun is that they know each other. So when they have a real problem, they call each other, they go deep in the detail. Because they had kind of virtual beer, let me say, with the jokes. And this is fundamental. Without that, you cannot build trust, let me say. This is my experience. And now what we want to do in EXO is to create a European network of CISO. And we do it on Signal, by the way, a little bit better, maybe safer, to start building up this link across sides of the different countries. And it's difficult also because different countries speak different languages, have a different level of maturity, different interests, different applications, different data they want to need, different quality of data, as has also been said. It's a challenge, but we have started now, this week. So it will come up. If it is coming up, something good, I'm sure we will have managed to bring together all this, which will be a good counterpart for you and for the public sector, because they do share information at different level. Maybe they're a bit more reluctant to share with public sector, yes. And even regulation are not sufficient for them to share all what they know. But they know a lot, I can tell you. And this is, so step by step, we try to create this trust. And then, of course, we need to give the technology, we have to give the network, we have to get all what is enabling them to move from a one-to-one to one-to-many and to many-to-many sharing. This is hopefully the next step. And we see how we go, but of course, now we also in EXO, we have created the task force that would like to prepare in a month, more or less, a paper to give to the Commission about the recommendation from user, but also to the providers, what could be, what this platform or SOCs could look like, some as we are doing today, yeah. But really, I think I see things are changing, maturing in the different countries, and that very, very good also because, I mean, the size of these weeks are under pressure. You know it very well because of Ukraine and so on, and the threats which are spamming around, well, going around Europe, or simply the malware we have seen with the COVID period. Sorry, I wanted to give this view. Maybe, Jorge, you want to say something about your size, or you are working as a security in the security department of the group.
Yes, and yeah, well, but my role is mainly focused on the technology part, and we have talked. Elias has talked about the artificial intelligence, the potential machine learning models, and the way that we are going to manage the incredible amount of data, etc., etc. But at the end, I'm totally agree with Leah and with you, Luigi. The key point is people. Obviously, people are here also, but mainly people. Um, I think that the concept could be different, and of course the goal is the same. But the idea of creating a solid network of key people well connect and with this level of trust pre-built. I mean, and this kind of conference help. I'm sorry not to be there, but the face-to-face relationship is always helping. And first to establish these relationships, and then the technology is the next step. And nowadays we have talked about different levels of maturity in the different member states. But I think that this level of maturity affects only on the technology part and the data that potentially they are collecting. But the people, the intention of the people is the same. And I'm pretty sure, and I'm guessing now, but I'm pretty sure that the key people in each institution and in each public institution and in each private company has the same objective, and I don't know how to name it, but this is a kind of collaboration and a kind of build this shield, European shield, to protect us, helping us detecting faster. And you mentioned a WhatsApp group. In Spain, we have the same thing, even worse because now we are using Telegram, and it's not the best channel. But jokes apart, it is quite interesting. We created a few years ago in a context of incident response of ransomware nationally. You probably all of you remember WannaCry that affects globally a lot of companies and public institutions. So we coordinated ourselves during these days, and we 5 years after we still daily talking and sharing in a non-formal way the information that could be useful for everybody. And then this allows also the bilateral conversations. So I totally agree with Leah and you, Luigi, that the people and the personal relationships are the key point here. And after that, of course, we have to start building the technology, the platform, the standardization and the governance of the data if we want to be able to ingest and to deal with all this kind of data, obviously with the help of the artificial intelligence. But I think we are in the long term on that way.
Thank you, Jorge. Ilias, you wanted to intervene now?
Yes, actually, let me. Shall I respond to the question?
Well, there was you can insert it in your.
Okay, yes, I will. I like a lot that people agree with me on the panel, but then it's not fun. So let me just.
Don't worry, I can.
Let me just, for the sake of, let's say, the discussion, actually pose a question to everyone that has agreed with me about the importance of the personal connection, if you like.
We were agreeing with this beer.
Yeah, and the beer, and his beer. So, question, because this is a chicken and egg problem, if you like. What is more important? Is it the personal connection, or is it the knowledge and the existence of governance? And a governance that creates alignment of incentives. Meaning, I would argue that even if I don't know Luigi for 15 years, if I'm in an environment which creates the right alignment incentives and the right level of control for me to be comfortable to share information, I am more inclined to do that. And if that particular grouping or structure meets regularly or has a regular cadence, I'm more inclined ultimately to create also the personal touch. So what should go first? Should it be the governance, or should it be the let's all get together for a beer? Now, to the question, which I think is related. There was a question that Luigi shared with me on the iPad about what do I think needs to be the incentives to derive information sharing from the side of the public sector to the private sector. Because often the private sector will do information sharing, but it's going to be more difficult for the public. That's a tough one, is the honest answer. I would argue...
Then we will ask it to Carlos.
Yes, you should. I would argue that for the public sector at least, apart from the same requirement of alignment of incentives, and by the way, the public sector incentives are likely to be sometimes more complicated than the private sector. The private sector incentives may be common commercial objective or may be common threat. The public sector objective is possible also that is geopolitical, which creates additional complications. But apart from that, I would also argue the importance of the regulatory framework. So for example, there has been time that we had law enforcement agencies that would desperately want information from us, but because of the way the regulatory framework was around the criminal investigation, they could not reciprocate information back to us. And it doesn't mean that we want, to know what the criminal investigation is, but what we do want is to be able to block a threat. Equally, I have been into scenarios whereby the information sharing between public and private sector has a different type of tension. I detect a cyber attack. I disclose it to the government agency. And the government agency might turn around and say, do not block it yet. And my reaction would be, what do you mean? I want to block it. It's an attack. I need to stop it. It affects my customer. Yes, you do. But when you block it, then the attacker knows that we know. And what we want to do is we want to understand what they're going to do. So in that relationship, you see a different dynamic. I want to do what's right for my customers. They want to do what's right for my customers, but they also want to make sure that they are they also understand the nature and they possibly attribute the threat. So again, it's a hypothetical scenario, but it's one that shows that the incentives, if you like, are not always aligned, or maybe aligned and at some point diverged.
Yeah, there was a question right now from Harry Perret, the CEO of Asati, who said, why are you talking about the network rather than the ecosystem? Because that's going somehow in the same thing that you said. It's not only about trust. Creating the environment, it depends on the environment that you have.
I don't disagree. I have to describe it somehow. Ecosystem is probably a more nice way of describing it. In the end, It's about a system which enables permissions, control, and rewards for the contributing party.
So, Carlos, how do you see this, the information coming from the public? You are pilots. I mean, you have real experience now how to put things together.
I think is to have a VR is good for to gain trust, but it's not a question only of trust. It's question of to create the infrastructure necessary and also to push a little bit to push. It's very important to make a little of pressure. In Spain, in the public sector, people don't have the knowledge, the necessary knowledge for this field of cybersecurity. So they traditionally they contract a provider, and they let to the cybersecurity to the provider. The provider, as I said before, they don't share information because they are competing in the market. So we are working into places. In one place, in the public, we are connecting the public employees, saying you have to share information about incident, and we are creating this network between public entities, only public entities, and they are exchanging information, and they are starting to talk. Okay, you have to. We, the CCM, we have more information. We are started to share information with them, and now we have a little network that the public entities they are sharing information between them. The idea is that they believe that the SOC is his SOC and the information is his information, and they will try. We want to try that they will share this information about this channel, only public entities. In the private, with the private providers, we are pushing a little bit because we are evaluating the information that they share. And we are doing a level of goal level to the companies that share really good information. If you don't share information in a period of time and so on, you will lose your goal level. And we are saying to the public sector, if you are going to contract a SOC, please ask for the goal level to the providers in order that the providers share a lot of information. So it's question not only trust, it's question to push a little bit, it's question to create infrastructure, it's question of that the organization. So as I said before, we are in a pilot project, little by little. Right now we can see something, but I need time to say the reality.
So how do you see like from your experience on SOCs, what could really be the effect of bringing together? How it's technology feasible? What are the challenges there? How you see it? Because we have questions about also how you bring them together from different policy, different countries, and you see policy issues, technology issues. What are because also Julie said we have to create some cross, how do you call it, so at the beginning?
The platforms, we want to create cross-border platforms.
Cross-border, yeah, but also you could,
like
the mechanism that can help to,
and this can be really challenging. I have worked a bit with Europol and their internal information sharing between all the various jurisdictions involved in Europol and what each slice of Europol can share with the others. It makes things horrible. You would like to assume that Europol takes a bunch of intelligence and put it into one big database. No, it's a database with a number of slices, depending on under which circumstances that data can actually be shared. I mean, that's to a large degree the same in cybersecurity. Have you ever tried to ask a German for his network logs? He will just laugh at you because the Germans are very strict about that. And so on. Yes, it's extremely complicated, and I don't have any really good solutions. The way I do is work around it by personal connections, but that doesn't scale. Julie mentioned the scaling, and of course, whatever you come up with, it needs to scale. There have been attempts at making trust scale by saying, oh, we have this community, you can enter this community if 2 current members will vouch for you, and those must be people who personally know you and trust you. And so what you end up with in the end is something that is similar to Freemasons or something. And it actually works to a degree. It works as at least a network within a platform in which you can sort of bootstrap your personal network.
Yeah, well, okay, if you allow me the joke, we could scale maybe from north of Europe from a beer to south of Europe a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Ilias, yeah.
So, a couple of thoughts. We are in town that is famous for producing regulation. Okay? So, having a clear legal basis in cybersecurity legislation, for instance, NISD, as to how and under what conditions you can process personal data for cybersecurity purposes. Recital 49 and Article 6F of GDPR, for those that are initiated in these kind of discussions. That actually helps the problem that Leif described about the German, Spanish, Italian, Greek, Dutch log files. Meaning, what kind of personal data can I access and under what legal conditions? Is it cybersecurity relevant? Is it strictly necessary proportionate? Which is the language really that is in GDPR, example number 1. Equally on the other side, the Commission right now has proposed in the Data Act language around, for example, the government may be in a position to request data in a scenario of emergency. The emergency is not well defined. We know cybersecurity data is extremely sensitive. How would governments feel about government A claiming an emergency and like that having access to cybersecurity data of critical infrastructure providers in jurisdiction B? An example, a difficult example, one that I'm not sure how thought through has been or what do we mean when we say emergency. In my experience, information sharing either in closed groups or bilaterally works very well. The third scenario that it works very well in bigger communities is a scenario whereby there is commonality of purpose, commonality of rules, level of control of information, and finally a reward in what you're contributing. I'm thinking here of models like a Cyber Threat Alliance, for example, in the US. And I'm thinking also of models, because I sit on the advisory board of Europol, I'm thinking of models that Europol has imposed, and they work, frankly, very well. And also, if I want to go and praise the Commission and the EU work, the time that I was sitting at the advisory board of ENISA has been a model that has been working very well, exactly because of the building of trust. So there are mechanisms that we have at EU level that have worked actually quite well. The bit about the technology or the interoperability, in my eyes, is not the problem. How do we go about building the human and governance aspect to put them underneath it, the technology? That is really where the crux of the matter is, and frankly, the biggest success.
Yeah, but you know, there's one question from Nina from Clavista. She's a friend, and she's come up something which is linked. That would maybe Julie, I don't know if too much touchy question, but because the impression is that we are moving from cybersecurity, a technology issue linked to business and so on, to something which is really driven by the responsibility of national public administrations or whatever public administration. They are those who are setting the rules, which is in a way is true because legislation and so on. But at the end, those who are facing the threats are very often the private sector. So, and the feeling that I know when discussing with a number of members of EXO is that this SOC story looks very much a network of public SOCs.
So
maybe I'm wrong.
no, it's a good
but
question.
That's the feeling that is going around.
No, it's a good question. I mean, this is not something we ever said. I think we have realized very early on that those who have a lot of the data are the private sector people. So I don't think we get very far if we stop at public sector. And secondly, there is a network of CSIRTs, and very often they perform the role of public SOCs, let's say. So we do not, again, want to replicate that. I think the added value in what we're trying to do is to bring together the public and the private sector. So that would be the whole idea. Because if we want to, bring together a lot more data or higher quality data, but a lot more data, and then we need to have both sides involved.
Yeah, but the joint
So I think
cyber
there's
unit
no
is envisaging the private in a certain time, put it that way, to be polite.
Yeah, but here we're not talking about the steps to realize a joint cyber unit. Joint cyber unit is one thing, and what we are talking about with this very concrete project around SOCs is something that will support all the whole community. So, if we get better at pulling together this data and analyzing it and getting better outputs, it can serve all those who participate, and it should serve the private sector structures, the CSIRTs and others, but also, the ISACs and ultimately all those who contribute. So it's a capability which we hope will, emerge at some point and should benefit everyone. Then there is of course, a legal framework around, but here again, we're talking about something that complements, that is added to it, that would work on the basis of incentives and getting something back, which hopefully can also, enlarge and expand the amount of things that people would be willing to share. Usually with regulation, then you would tend to look at, what is the minimum I really have to give to comply. Whereas here, the idea would be the reverse one. And coming back to the interpersonal and personal relations, we're not here to try to replace that either. I welcome the initiatives that you just described to create new networks, and all of this should be encouraged. And then we hope that all the investments that will go into the national capacities. Also, as I mentioned, 80 million is the first batch of grants that we will allocate later this year. It should serve to support the whole ecosystem, because this is the foundation. Then, on top of that, we're looking at this next step. Again, how to federate all these initiatives, and that's where we are slowly trying to build this concept. And there, I'm afraid, yes, we're trying to move away a bit from the personal relations, because that won't be sufficient. But we also do not need to immediately jump to the most complex scenario where it's not necessarily immediately something where everybody has to share highly sensitive data, and then you add law enforcement constraints and all these things. We can take it step by step. So I think, from my understanding, there are data, as I said earlier, that are perhaps less sensitive, but also less tapped into to try to monitor what is happening. So maybe you can start with this. And there, the tools matter. I agree that the technology is not the key to all of this, but still, it can help. It can boost things, because if we talk about large sets of data, then we need to filter that. We need to see how we can make some high-quality outputs out of it. And I think we should definitely leverage the new functions of data analytics tools, AI, etc. So that's also the purpose of Then the second investment that we will make later this year, and there's this 30 million envelope to support those cross-border platforms and equip them properly. All of this is in the making, in progress. I heard a lot and learned a lot from this panel. So,
it's not over.
No,
It's not over.
not
Actually,
over.
there are a
already
few
learned
minutes
a
left,
lot.
and I receive a message that maybe I should take a few questions from the audience. But first of all, I would like to have one word from Jorge. Jorge, what would you ask from this panel, you as a user? From
Well,
this panel, from this network, sorry, from this
yes,
network.
I will ask a real joint collaboration. So Julie has remarked before, this is not just a public sector initiative, has to be a joint, both public and private initiative, and with bilateral information sharing. So the initiative it will be very well received for the private sector, because I think that only at a public level and a national or European level, that's the only way to start the conversations. And Julie mentioned before also that it has to be phase by phase or step by step. It is not necessary. I mean, it's good to think big and to imagine the near future, but let's start with small steps, and then we see how to go scaling. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So there are questions. There are 4 minutes left. There are questions from the audience. Please. I think there is. No, because otherwise I don't think they can hear you on the web.
Hi, thanks again. Again, Mike Scardival from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. For any people who are new, I wanted to comment a little bit on a little bit more than ask a question on the personal relationship versus systematic relationship question, because outside of the cybersecurity world, in the general security world, this is something we've spent the last 20 years working on, and I've personally spent most of that time working on. And I would argue the personal relationship will always produce results. People will always be happy with it, but it will never be scalable, as you mentioned, but it will also never be reliable, and it will never be strategically acceptable. To give you an example, 12, 13 years ago, we had an incident where there was a potential terrorist attack on an aircraft flying to Europe. Turned out not to be one, so wasn't ever in the newspapers. We were trying to collaborate through a personal relationship. Unfortunately, one of the key people in that personal relationship decided that morning to take a picnic with his family and turn off his iPhone. So, not because of bad will, not because of anything else, that network absolutely collapsed in a time of urgent need. It's also not sustainable because people change over time. And two people may have a great relationship, one moves on to a new job, and the next person who comes in to replace her may not get along with the other person. I've seen liaison offices go from the most productive in the continent to the least productive in the continent that we've then disbanded within 2 years, all because of personalities. So I strongly agree with, what's your name, sir? Mr. Chantzos, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I love the way you described it of you need to have procedures, controls, and rewards and build that into a system. Now, you can use your personal relationships to start that, but you have to devise the process and ideally start to automate as much of the process as possible so it's accountable. And so it enables the people that are working within it to gain the benefits consistently. Sorry that it's not a question, more of a comment, but just I've spent 20 years working on this, so wanted to chime in. Thanks.
Thank you. Any for your comment? Other question left? We have 1 minute. No one. So any other from the panel, some final comment from you? Julie, we are working for you. You know, we try to give you some good advice.
No, you gave a lot of good input, not to me, but I think it's, in the collective interest. There's a general objective here to reinforce our collective security.
Yeah, indeed. So, with this, I think it's time to close, and I thank all the speakers and the participants. And I know that I have to say something because now we have a coffee break. Indeed, we will come back live at 4 p.m. During the break, there will be coffee and tea served in the foyer for those attending in person, as well the exhibition booth from EXO, Sector, and Cloudflare. For those attending virtually, you can now use your networking function to connect with other delegates and visit sponsor booths in the expo area. So after the break, there will be session 4, enhancing European and international cooperation to respond to cyber threats and promote a global, stable, and novel cyberspace. Thank you for your attention and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.